With the authority of the Council, I shall now confer the degree of Doctor of the University. I call upon the Vice-Chancellor to make this presentation.
Acting Deputy Chancellor, the Council of the University has resolved to award the degree of Doctor of the University to Professor Wang Gungwu, CBE. Wang Gungwu was born in Surabaya, Java in October 1930. He was educated at Anderson School in Ipoh, Malaysia, and at the School of African and Oriental Studies at the University of London, where he gained his doctoral degree in 1957. From then until 1968, he worked at the University of Malaya, where he was Dean of Arts from 1962 to 1963 and Professor of History from 1963 to 1968. In 1968, Professor Wang Gungwu came to Australia, taking up the position of Head of the Department of Far Eastern History at the Australian National University, working at that university until 1986. From 1975 to 1980, he was also Director of the Research School of Pacific Studies. As Vice-Chancellor of the University of Hong Kong since August 1986, Professor Wang Gungwu has made significant and lasting contributions to the growth and advancement of that institution. Under his strong leadership and expert direction, the university has developed a worldwide reputation for excellence in education. Its medical faculty has become one of the world's centres of excellence in the discipline, and the university continues to thrive as a centre for research in a wide range of areas, particularly molecular biology. Professor Wang Gungwu has been instrumental in encouraging a new spirit of outreach which aims to foster and coordinate collaboration and exchange globally, within the Asian region and with China. In addition to these positions, Professor Wang Gungwu has also occupied visiting professorial and fellowship positions in the United States and Britain, as well as numerous senior leadership positions in professional associations, such as President of the Asian Studies Association of Australia and of the International Association for Historians of Asia. He has also found time to serve on major government committees in various parts of the world. Most importantly, he was chairman of the Australia-China Council from 1984 to 1986 and a member of the Executive Council of Hong Kong from 1990 to 1992. Professor Wang Gungwu has a long and impressive publications list, and the range of his expertise is astonishingly broad, encompassing East and Southeast Asia, both past and present. He is among the world's leading authorities on Chinese history, especially that of the 9th and 10th centuries, and early Chinese relations with Southeast Asia, as well as on the Chinese in Southeast Asia. Some of his most influential early publications on these subjects include The Structure of Power in North China During the Five Dynasties, published in 1963, and The Nunhai Trade, published in 1958. His essays on relations between China and the Chinese in Southeast Asia have been so wide-ranging, numerous and influential that they have been collected into several volumes, in particular Community and Nation, Essays on Southeast Asia and the Chinese in 1981, and China and the Chinese Overseas, published in 1991. Professor Wang Gungwu's life has been one of total commitment to academe. In addition to his published work, he is a gifted teacher who has served as a model and mentor for younger generations of scholars. His interesting and provocative ideas have encouraged and challenged students. As well as publishing and teaching, he has made numerous appearances on radio and television. His lucid and insightful comments have made him particularly influential among commentators on Asian affairs. With a wealth of knowledge and understanding of both Australian and Asian cultures, Professor Wang Gungwu has always been concerned about relations between these areas and nations. His work and career have contributed extensively to improving relationships particularly through his chairmanship of the Australia-China Council. It is doubtful if any other person has provided such leadership in this country and in Asia to the development of Asian studies in general and China studies in particular, or to Australia's relations with Asian nations and the relations between Australians and Asians. It is especially fitting that the Council of Griffith University should honour Professor Wang Gungwu in recognition of his distinguished services to education and the community. Acting Deputy Chancellor, it is with great pleasure that I present to you Professor Wang Gungwu for admission to the degree of Doctor of the University.
I now call upon Professor Wang Gungwu, CBE, Doctor of the University, to deliver the occasional address.
Acting Deputy Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, fellow graduates of Griffith University, colleagues and friends, the last time I spoke at the Griffith University nearly 10 years ago, it was to congratulate the graduates of this very fine university on their readiness to go forth into a new world of Australia-Asian relations. It was an occasion for me to praise the university for being the first to open its doors with a school dedicated to contemporary Asian studies. I was honored to do so. Today, it is an even greater honor for me to join your ranks as one of you. I'm particularly proud to join a university that has shown how speedily and skillfully it can prepare itself for the remarkable changes that have occurred during the past 2.5 decades. By concentrating on many of these changes in Asia, Griffith University was among the first to see the importance of the economic revolution in Asia. It is interesting to see how universities in Asia themselves are paying more attention to the people who have made that revolution possible, the wealth-minded national leaders and the businessmen whom they have encouraged. I have observed that even the Chinese, who have always placed the merchants at the bottom of the social scale, have revised their views on the subject. It seems therefore appropriate for me to make particular reference to the new breed of businessmen in Asia and offer some thoughts on the larger impact that their activities might bring to the region. The term businessmen is a generic term that includes many kinds of people. At the level of trader or merchant, there have always been such people in Asia. But if you include the entrepreneur, the industrialist, the financier, and other professionals in the world of business today, then we are talking about different kinds of protagonists in the economic transformation of what had been primarily agrarian societies. Asia, of course, is a large, complex, and something really hard to generalize about. Nevertheless, I think there is no question that the role of the businessmen all over Asia has been greatly enhanced during the past 2 decades. It is arguable whether this enhancement was directly due to the challenge of Western capitalism and imperialism, or whether it was really the result of nationalist pressures or nationalist responses to poverty and backwardness. For Australia today, it matters little which is correct. The important thing is to understand that there is a new appreciation of what businessmen can do to enrich a nation, and therefore to set about to study how these businessmen function in their respective countries, in the region and elsewhere. The first thing to note is that Asian businessmen work very closely with their governments. At one end, they are virtually indistinguishable from the specialist officials who administer the state enterprises and the various planning and control organs. At the other end, they are doing business with at least official encouragement, if not actual direction, especially when they have foreign partners or when they venture beyond their national boundaries. For many years, commentators have focused on the question of whether these businessmen in Asia have succeeded because they mastered well the lessons from their earlier Western counterparts, who so dominated the economies of the region for the past 2 centuries. The famous Chinese dictum, Chinese learning as base and Western learning as application, could perhaps be adapted here to read Asian values as base, Western science as application. If this is at all justified, then these businessmen are Asians first, and they're using what they have learned from the West in order to put it in one way, to beat the West at their own game. It probably is not that simple. Of course, the necessary science and technology have to be acquired. At the same time, banking and credit principles, commercial law and accounting practices all have to be incorporated into the new Asian enterprises. At the next stage, higher levels of education and training were needed to prepare a whole new generation of executives and technicians to manage the businesses and industries. And as each country became increasingly urbanized, and there are now larger cities and towns all over Asia, universal education then followed. And with that came education for girls. More women joined the workforce. And that changed the nature of the nuclear family, as more of them became dependent on 2 incomes. There is a degree of inevitability about all this. And there are studies now which show that more changes will follow. Thus, the cry around Asia is to put a halt to the tendency to tread the path taken by all countries in Europe, North America, and Australasia. In particular, warnings have been sounded against excessive individualism, warnings about environmental degradation, and in particular, warnings against the exponential growth of the social welfare system. And you would have all heard about all these. Here, of course, the example of Japan, the leader in Asian business, is thoroughly ambivalent. Almost the most isolated Asian state until the middle of the 19th century, it has gone furthest and fastest in adapting to Western science and technology. Yet it appears to have preserved most of its basic cultural values. No one, however, can be confident that Japan can be a model for all the others. The fine data that we've collected now and we've used to explain their cultural values have only shown how little Japan has in common with the rest of Asia. Even the Buddhism and Confucianism of Japan have distinct Japanese characteristics. It is obviously one thing for Japan to take from and adapt what it borrowed from the rest of Asia, but quite another thing for the rest of Asia to try and take or learn from Japan what Japan had uniquely shaped through its own chemistry. But in the realm of business, however, there may be something that is less quintessentially Japanese and more in line with the inclinations of other Asian countries. And I refer to the cozy relationship between government and business that has been diagnosed as the secret of Japan's economic success. Now, this is not a place to argue whether Japan originated this form of relationship or not. What is striking is how attractive the idea of government directing business to create more wealth and hence more power, how attractive that is to most other Asian leaders. There may have been a general predisposition towards such a relationship anyway, which is generally recognized as Asian. I'm not certain that this is so, but I expect that this will be studied carefully in time. I might add that a cozy relationship between government and business does not always work. You may recall that some state governments in Australia had experimented with such a relationship with disastrous results. Maybe that failed in Australia because Australia has passed the stage when this kind of relationship can work. Maybe it was simply not part of Australian culture. Or maybe the sharpest brains had gone into business and not, as has been likely in Asia, been recruited very specially and very carefully into the political and bureaucratic arenas. What is clear there is that in many parts of Asia, governments have exercised power in economic development and have attracted the most talented people to work in them. More recently, this has further evolved into a wider appreciation of the importance of the private sector itself. Therefore, the model of the government as superior business strategist doing the instructing and businessmen as loyal servants acting along the guidelines provided for them, that model has become one that many countries in Asia have chosen to follow. There are, of course, subtle features in the relationship which may vary from country to country and from business group to business group. But the basic idea is both simple and appealing to the Asian nationalist leaders who want their countries to grow strong quickly. With the exception of the Philippines and also of Hong Kong, whose governments have been less intrusive, all of East and Southeast Asia have applied the formula to their plans and to all their efforts. Now, if this continues and shapes the economies of the region for the future, what is Australia to do? After living for the past 9 years in the heart of the region, in Hong Kong, I'm struck by the success of Australian universities in selling education to various groups of Asians in the APEC region, the Asia-Pacific Economic Region, Caucasus region. Similarly, universities in North America and the European Union, including Britain, have also been most successful. Now, is this going to make a difference in the long run and make the products of all this education more like Australians and other Westerners? On the surface, this is happening. I have mentioned just now higher standards of scientific education and the introduction of modern economics, finance, and accounting. More broadly, urbanization has changed everyone's lifestyle, and the education of women, in particular, has transformed the nuclear family. Questions of standards, of quality control, of accountability and transparency, of law and the protection of private property, protection of the environment, and also protection of political and individual rights, these questions have been raised everywhere. And there have also been the growth of new social classes, the advent of party politics, and the communications revolution that has made global interdependence a necessity for everybody. Now, all these would suggest that as the businessmen in Asia have increasingly to cope with similar social and political problems as those faced by businessmen in the West and in Australia, they simply would have to become more like their Western counterparts. Now, is it that simple? There are, I believe, strong undercurrents underneath which need our attention. There is evidence that by speeding up the acquisition of the latest advanced scientific skills, the Asian governments have increased their ability to direct patriotic businessmen to enrich their countries in traditionally acceptable ways. If Japan is any guide to the future, Asian businessmen will contribute their share of Western learning to serve an essentially Asian base. Now, this is likely to happen for one important reason. Deep-rooted traditions are no longer being rejected as backward and irrelevant. Everywhere there are calls for revival or restoration of religions, ethical systems, and cultural artifacts of every description. Whether these are more akin to defensive, atavistic reactions that try to turn the clock back, or whether they are more forward-looking and could be compared to the Renaissance in Western Europe, is probably too early for us to tell. But that kind of appeal has grown strong and should not be ignored by the rest of us. Certainly, nationalist elites all over Asia are fighting to bring back respect for their respective traditions. They do not hesitate to use the government machinery to support popular movements that give full expression to such demands. For Asian businessmen, 3 different ways of doing business, all compatible with one another in their eyes, I believe, may be employed. They could model themselves on Western entrepreneurs and use and follow their large management structures. They could also become close partners of the state in commercial and industrial enterprises and receive not only strong support against foreign competitors, but also rich rewards as national economic heroes. Or most of them may prefer to think in less ambitious terms and focus on the family firm, a very traditional way of doing business. The family firm as the basic unit of business as it has always been. Here I refer to the firms based on extended families, most commonly found among the Chinese, but also known among the Indians and several other ethnic groups in the region. These firms are never more than small to medium size, but always the great survivors, quick to grow and easy to defend and revive, always maneuverable, flexible, and adaptable. As Australians venture forth into Asia, they will encounter many varieties of response to the astonishing impact of Western civilization in Asia. I suggest that you do not let them dazzle you too much. Instead, it would be wise to anticipate the power of rejuvenated traditions in the future of Asian development, even among the most progressive businessmen. Instead of studying Asian cultures and traditions as something exotic and belonging to the past, in this new context, it would certainly be essential to study the great traditions of Asia in order to understand what the new generations of Asian businessmen hope to achieve in the 21st century. With those few thoughts, let me say again what an honor it is for me to stand before you again and share your pride and pleasure in graduating from this most entrepreneurial university. You have a great responsibility as the future leaders of the Australian enterprise in Asia. And may I join in wishing all of you every success. Thank you.